It's now 10:06 and time for the Saturday special with Michael Zwerling.
Griffin Queener.
That's me.
How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling much better today.
Good. Do you want to tell the audience what happened to you?
Sure. I got food poisoning. This is the first time in my life I've had food poisoning. It was a traumatizing experience. I will probably not eat hummus again for the rest of my life.
Hear that, people? Do not eat hummus.
Don't do it. I don't recommend
Take a tip
it.
from Griffin Queener.
It's not worth the risk.
Jeez. Is there anybody else out there, I wonder, who's gotten food poisoning from hummus?
I'm sure there's.
And are you sure that it's hummus? You got to be fair to the hummus.
I did look it up, and because I was thinking about all the foods I ate that day. You know, I had an egg sandwich in the morning, but that couldn't have been it. I scrambled those eggs well; they were thoroughly cooked.
Wait a minute, Griffin Queener.
Eggs could definitely be your problem.
Absolutely.
Salmonella. I mean,
But it happened like 4 to 6 hours right after I ate that. You know, I looked at the time frame. You know, food poisoning usually kicks in 4 to 6 hours after you've eaten the food. And that's when I started to sweat. And, you know, my stomach started to do turns and I was getting nauseous. It was about, I think I ate the hummus at like 5 o'clock, and by 10 o'clock I was in pain, and I was having a bad time.
And how much earlier than that?
I ate it in the morning. That was my breakfast, was the egg sandwich.
The egg
it probably wasn't that then.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, okay then, Griffin Queener. May I ask you a personal question?
Yes, you may.
What personal question do you think I should ask you that I haven't asked you in the past?
I don't know. What haven't you asked me? I feel you've asked me quite a wide array of questions.
I was just been lazy. I didn't think of one today. So I figured the personal question I'd ask you is what you'd like to be asked.
Can I ask you a personal question instead?
No.
No? Oh.
Oh, go ahead. All
right. I just want to know, because I'm curious. My sister got a bunch of socks recently, and she likes the really big, like, thick, woolly socks.
Yeah.
I hate them because I think they're too constricting on my feet. What's your opinion?
I wouldn't think of it.
You wouldn't think of it? Do you not?
No, I wouldn't think of having big, thick socks.
Well,
so I'm
there
with
you
you.
go.
I'm with
Okay,
you.
yeah, absolutely.
And your sister needs to go to a psychiatrist.
I agree. I agree.
But you live in Santa Cruz and San Francisco, so if you lived in upstate New York, you'd be thinking thick wool socks. Yeah,
right. You're absolutely right. I'm sure. And so that's my reason. I mean, Mike Grotkin is real smart, and he saw through that right away.
He did.
And he's
he did.
correct. But I don't live in upstate New York. I live in Santa Cruz, where I was born and raised, and of course in San Francisco part of the time. Dave Michaels.
Good morning, MZ.
How are you feeling
I am
today?
doing well. I feel fantastic.
Okay. What's on the docket for today in the Dave Cave?
Today out in the Dave Cave, sir, with your word, we have a fantastic sale. All you got to do is say the word.
Okay. What is the word?
The word is buy 2, get 1 free.
Wow. Of anything?
Of anything, yes.
Yeah.
You can mix and match. No credit cards, though. No credit cards. I've been getting it. That's just a pain in the butt. No credit cards. But we can buy 2, get 1 free, and you can mix and match.
We sell it below cost, but we make it up in volume.
Right.
Right.
So if you want to buy 2 cans of Tangy Tangerine, take the extra $65 of credit and buy whatever else you want with it.
Yeah.
That's the way we're going to do it. Buy 2, get 1 free.
See, you're getting even more creative
Right.
and even more flexible.
Right. So this way, you can try out the...
Is this just today?
Just today.
Yeah, just today. Good.
Yeah. So this way you can try out the Prost FX, or you can try out the Sweeties, or you can try out those things that you haven't tried before. Today's the day to do it.
I don't know why. I don't know why it tickles me so much, but we get so many emails from people talking about my prostrate.
I get that too. They come in and ask for prostrate, and
They don't know
and
that there's no R in the word.
I just let it go.
I couldn't do that. I'd start laughing hysterically and uncontrollably, and they would wonder. And I say, it's not prostrate, it's prostate.
If I did tell them that, MZ, it would be after the sale was complete.
Oh, okay, good.
That I would start to make fun of them.
See, I need to take a page out of Dave Michaels' book. If KSCO would have been run by Dave Michaels or someone who took a page out of his book, we would be a very successful station instead of the financial failure that we are.
So you have to think the customer's always right. I think that's
The customer's
that's
always
logic
right.
here.
Absolutely.
If they think there's an R in there, there's an R in there.
I'll be out there till 2, MZ.
Now, and remember, all of you men and women with prostrate problems, be sure to go to the Dave Cave today, because there is a special emphasis on prostrate problems. Okay? Now, see here, Griffin Queener. I think, you did load up the proper things here, right? So we need to open the show officially. 3, 2, 1. Oh.
And then nothing happened. What is it?
Yeah. Yeah. This is not cool. This is not cool at all. Here. I'm going to.
You know, the engineering's the best part of this radio station. What happened this morning, Michael?
You know, right, because it's a train wreck, and people like to watch train wrecks or car wrecks with pencil necks, right? You know what it was this time? I got it, Griffin Queener. I know exactly what's wrong. In the past, when I put the pot up, it turned the thing on. This time it didn't. Someone's monkeyed with the settings or something. Now I have to put the pot up and push the button. Well, I push the button, so now when I say 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, a brighter day is here. Good morning, may we bring you cheer.
We've got time, we've got tunes, we've got time, tunes, and temperature.
Get up and go, it's today, you know, on KSCO Radio.
I just realized it's been a long time since I've thanked the listeners for tuning into the radio station. So I'm going to thank them now. Do you think that's a good idea, Griffin Queener? Good, he's nodding his head. All right, thank you for listening to the Saturday Special on what is hopefully your favorite radio station. We hope to get better and better. Stay with us for the next 2 hours at least on the Saturday Special. I think you'll be happy you did so. Okay, see you.
Good morning, now stay right here on KSCO Radio.
So Mike Rotkin and I were sitting in the lobby a little while ago and, reminiscing about when he was here last, or at least on my show, on the Saturday Special last. And we think it was like a decade ago or more, right, Mike?
Definitely a long time ago. It might have been 7 or 8 years, but probably closer to 10.
Yeah, but I'm sure that there are people in our listening audience now who remember what I believe is the last time you were on the station, if not the Saturday Special, and that was when you agreed to be on the show with Dr. Bill Wattenberg.
Right.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was a pretty fierce debate that day.
Yeah. Were you in the studio?
I think so. Yeah, I wouldn't have called in. I was in the studio.
And was he in the studio?
No, I think he called in.
He was remote. Okay, and many people called Dr. Bill the smartest man in the world. He moved to heaven about a year ago, so we miss him. Anyhow, so I think, and it's always fun to have you on because you have a great sense of humor. And to me, that's the most important thing in the most important attribute of anybody is that they have a sense of humor.
Well, I'll tell you this. I was elected to city council 6 times, and if you don't have a sense of humor, you would not survive that experience.
God. I mean, first of all, I'd never get elected. But if I could be elected, I wouldn't last very long because I'd fall asleep and snore and embarrass everybody. Because all those things, just how do you do it? How does anybody do that?
I don't know how others do it, but I always find it fascinating how people interact with each other, especially in small groups. And to watch 7 people kind of go at something when you have different points of view, I really, what are they thinking? What argument might persuade that person to change their mind, or what's holding them back from agreeing with this particular program or to make this thing happen? And if you listen to people carefully, you start to figure out what things they don't care about or things that actually move them in a serious way. So I find that kind of interplay of people in small groups fascinating. And that's why I never fell asleep in a city council meeting. I missed 1.5 meetings in 26 years on the city council.
Okay.
And
on second thought, if I adopted your attitude, I probably wouldn't fall asleep if I just found it fascinating.
yeah, you have to. I mean, if you're just sitting there like, waiting for something to happen or, something. That's the other thing is I was sort of went there basically planning to try and get stuff done. And if you sort of go with the attitude of I'm just a rubber stamp stuff or I'm here to wait to see what happens, then you would be asleep. Because believe me, after how many tractor bids can you sit through before you decide, take the low bid is going to be the answer before you're finished.
All right, so was it 1979?
That was my first election, yeah, and the elections used to be back in March back then.
Okay.
So in March of '79, I got elected to the city council. I ran a protest campaign and had no hope of being elected, and then came in first out of 19 candidates.
And do you think and you were a lecturer or professor
Lecturer at the university.
At UC Santa Cruz?
Correct.
Since when? You had been there how long? That's how you came to Santa Cruz, or were you?
I actually came for a summer job in Santa Cruz doing research on migrant workers in California. And then I was in Santa Cruz about 2 days and thought, there must be a way to stay in this place. It's amazing. I'd come from upstate New York at Cornell. Oh. And I looked for work doing construction work and motorcycle repair. That's jobs I've had. I went to a vocational high school and I had these kind of vocational skills, and couldn't find work. And at the last minute, an opening in a graduate program, a guy didn't show up, and I applied at the last minute and got his space, and started grad school. And I was in grad school from '69 to '74, and then I started teaching as a lecturer in '74. And taught till I retired.
You and I were at UCSC at the same time then.
Could have been.
Yeah, I was there from '68 for 2 quarters. They were on the quarter system then, right out of high school. And they accepted everybody from Santa Cruz High School. I don't know why, but they did.
Well, they like local folks. They still, I think, give a real advantage to people from the local county.
And then I felt sorry that I didn't go to Berkeley, like a lot of my friends had and everything. So I did that. On the 3rd quarter, I transferred to Berkeley, and that got me there right smack in the middle of the People's Park, Vietnam War protests.
Great
and
timing
stuff like
for
that.
you, Mike.
Yeah, and I decided it was exciting, and I got to talk to John Lennon on the student radio station. That was fun. But other than that, I decided, hey, I want to go back to Santa Cruz. It took me a year to get back to UC Santa Cruz, and I finally did, and then I finished up. And finished in March of '72. So we were there at exactly the same time.
I think a lot of the students end up at UCSC had initially hoped to go to Berkeley, and Berkeley gets filled because it's one of the first 2 choices with UCLA in the 10 campus system, and so they get diverted, I guess is the word or whatever, to UCSC as a backup, second choice or whatever. And then they're here for about a quarter or maybe 2, and they realize, I like this so much better than going to Berkeley. And even it wasn't what they wanted, but it turns out to be just the physical beauty of the place.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good campus. There's a lot of, it's got its problems like any campus, but it's a good campus for
people find ways to stay here if they want to,
Yeah, like I said, it's.
Besides you,
I was
many
planning.
others.
I come for the summer job. Was planning to go back to upstate New York, and then the last minute, no, it worked out. It was just the accident, the right time, the right place. These things happen in life.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what do you think the most massive problem facing the Santa Cruz community is, as councilman/mayor emeritus?
I think pretty clearly it's housing issues, affordable housing. We produce lots of houses for wealthy people, and that's not a problem. It's there's stuff on the market all the time. You can always get a nice place, but for people who provide the services in this community, who work in we're a tourist town, and people who work in the tourist industry, where are you going to live? And so we have a huge, the housing problem leads to other problems. We have a huge problem on Highway 1 commute, because so many of the people that work in Santa Cruz have to live in Watsonville, where they can afford the housing or even find the housing. And so I think there's no question that housing is the biggest issue, and we don't have a lot of land left.
And it's been for probably most of the time that you were on the council, right?
When I've on the council, maybe even in early years, not so much, but I would say by 1980, it was not an issue. Probably, maybe by 1990, we started to have housing issues. I'll tell this on the radio, people will freak out, but the first place I rented in Santa Cruz when I came for that summer job was $70 a month, a 2-bedroom house with a yard for $70 a month.
On King Street?
It was actually on Merrill Street over here and right close to the radio station.
Okay.
Near 17th Avenue. And then they raised the rent to $90, and I was outraged and went to go find another place, which actually cost $90, but it was closer to the campus, so I didn't have so long a commute. I could ride my bicycle to work.
Jeez, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, it was, but there's no question that's our big issue, and it's both finding housing and being able to afford the housing that's there, and for all the folks students at the university has not done its fair share of providing housing for the students that they bring here.
Amen. I don't think there's anyone who would disagree with that.
And although some of that falls back on us, I'll quick digression here right away. At one point, the campus made a commitment to build 4,000 more housing units on campus. And then let's put this on the environmental and leftists in Santa Cruz. They didn't want them building up above Crown College, which was going over the boundary line for the city. Sphere of influence.
Even though it was still on university property.
Well, they're 2,000 acres they have up there. And there would have been 4,000 units. So they went to the local agency formation commission, LAFCO, which decides the boundaries of cities and where you can do stuff physically in the county. And they determined that they couldn't build the units. So we lost 4,000. Think of that. 4,000 new units on campus.
Well,
and the campus was going to build them.
I appreciate that you have brought that up because I was unaware of that. And that's a very important piece of information.
So the campus has been, since George Blumenthal was actually a pretty good chancellor when it comes to the question of, relating to the community. Unlike every other chancellor before him, he actually began to commit to putting money into traffic issues, intersections, where the university traffic was causing problems, and paying for their fair share of water costs and those sorts of things, but particularly this housing issue. And that's how we got this commitment to build 4,000 units. And now the university's, I think, still committed to building some housing, and they're doing a lot of infill housing in between places. And then they came up with the latest plan, which I don't support actually, which is to build housing on the Great Meadow at the entrance to campus. They've got 2,000 acres up there. There's all kinds of places they can build housing that wouldn't be so controversial and would provide an alternative.
Obviously, I've been incorrect in this perception. It's always been my perception that the university is exempt from the planning process because they're essentially part of the California government.
They are. They're state government, and the state government, whether it's the employment development department.
So how is it that LAFCO could have quashed this 4,000 housing unit thing, just because it was above the Redwood line or something?
I think
how is that can happen?
Well, the LAFCO itself is a state agency, although it's local, but it's part of the state government, and so they have kind of a comparable power to the university as another state agency. The city council couldn't stop that growth, for example, because they're a local agency, or the county government is not in a position, because the university does not go through planning, and they don't do building inspections or anything else that anybody else does, because they're a state agency, just like an employment development department doesn't have to, or whatever, if it's a state agency. But or Social Security, which is a federal agency, doesn't have to go through this local planning. But the LAFCO agency is in a position to, and the university might have taken that to court. They could have challenged that. There's still some question about whether they ultimately had that authority.
When did that happen?
Gosh.
A long time ago, right?
Yeah, it was quite a while ago now. That would have been at least 10 years ago. I'm trying to remember exactly when. Everything for me is 10 years ago.
Well, it seems to me that everybody agrees that there's a housing crisis, and it seems to me that people have been agreeing to about that for years, for decades.
I think the problem is,
and it's getting worse for sure, because now we got the homeless problem on top of it, which is a direct result.
It comes
a lot of it, anyhow, right?
It's a big piece of it. It's not the whole thing, but it's a big piece of it. No, I think there's a problem in that people if you ask people what's the biggest problem in town, most people, not everybody, but most people say it's housing. It's a housing crisis. But then you say, well, we'd like to build some housing near your near your house. And I'm not talking in plan. I mean, design, it matters and stuff. You're not going to build a 50-story tower next to my house, but the idea that you would build, I'll tell you. I have lots of these little stories, but here's one where I was on the city council, and there was a cul-de-sac, and the developer was going to build and led to Seabright Avenue. It wasn't on Seabright, but a little street off of Seabright.
Right.
And it's on a cul-de-sac. And they wanted to build 3 single-family homes. This is not like some big mega apartment complex or whatever. 3 single-family homes. We had 150 people come to the city council meeting. We were going to destroy the traffic in town on Seabright Avenue. Now, the study that they made them do a study, an environmental review study. The term there would be each house would generate up to 10 trips a day. So there may be 30 trips out of these 3 houses a day, which was the high side, believe me. You wouldn't have that many. Most people don't leave their house 10 times a day in a car. Right. But that could happen. But Seabright Avenue has 38,000 cars or 48,000 cars a day on it. And the idea that you're going to add 30 new trips. And so people came out to oppose this housing. Don't build these 3 units. I mean, so imagine if they had been proposing, which there was land for, an apartment complex that would have had, let's say, 10, 15 units or something. You probably could have done that on that site. They would have, we would have had 3,000 people at the meeting or something. So the not in my backyard thing is pretty large for a lot of folks. And for example, the city had a corridor plan and has in place a corridor plan to build more dense housing along Seabright, along major streets like Soquel Avenue and Water Street and Ocean and Mission. And so the neighbors who live behind that street, you have to have good design. You don't want to have a 3-story or a 4-story building up a wall up against your property line.
That's the reason they have zoning laws.
So you build a unit. So you build a more density up in the front along Soquel Avenue, and you have storefronts at the bottom and housing up above, and then you shade down towards the property behind you. And I would insist on that because it's you don't want to destroy people's sense of living in a single-family neighborhood or something. But it doesn't matter what you propose. If you're going to build rental units on Soquel Avenue, people are going to come out in droves and oppose it. And so the progressive council members right now, not all of them, but some of the progressive council members and the ones who sort of tout their own horns as blow their own horns as the most progressive council members and who say housing's the biggest issue and they would kill for housing, end up opposing a housing project on Soquel Avenue.
Hypocrites.
It is hypocrisy. That's the only word for it, because they play to the neighbors who come out in large numbers and say, "Don't do this to us." So there's a problem in that everybody knows there's a housing crisis, but nobody wants to see the actual solutions dealt with.
Okay, well, it seems to me then that the city council people are paying too much attention to the hypocritical neighbors.
I think what they should be doing is realize there's an issue. Their neighbors came out with concerns, and they should try and address those concerns. Like make sure, again, don't let them build a block apartment complex with a 4-story wall up against their property line. But the idea that they should, because they've shown up and said, we don't want anything and stuff, that you can't accept that as a public response to a housing project at this point. Of course, just for a moment, the real cause of our crisis here is the Silicon Valley. Because in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, they had 300,000 more new jobs created in the Silicon Valley than new housing units. So that's 1,900,000. And then the decades following, it wasn't quite as fast a growth and stuff, but we were at the level of about 100,000 more jobs than housing. So you have about 1.3 million or something people in the Silicon Valley looking for housing, and they have lots of money. And that's why there's a housing crisis from San Francisco to to Morgan Hill, and from the foothills of the Sierra into Santa Cruz. This whole Northern California region is affected by that economic engine of the Silicon Valley and what it's doing with these jobs without producing housing. So we need to have a statewide decision, I think, that counties, Santa Clara County and every other county, should have to provide new housing for every new job they create, kind of a balance of housing and jobs. That would fix us.
How could you do that?
The state could mandate it. State would mandate that you simply cannot, you can't create new jobs unless you build housing with it or support it. You don't have to build it yourself, but find a way that there's housing for each new job.
What a concept. I've never thought of that.
Because otherwise we're stuck with this mess. Because again, if the city council tomorrow were to wake up and say, we're going to build
Build, baby, build.
10,000 new units or something in Santa Cruz, which is not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
We're going to build 10,000 new units. It wouldn't put a dent in this demand. I mean, the demand that's pressuring Santa Cruz is way above that from the Silicon Valley. That's the problem.
What would put a dent in it? I guess what you said.
Some kind of state action, or at least
So why
regional
would
or
anybody,
statewide action.
whoever, it seems like such an absurd concept that a government should mandate, putting your thumb, trying to quash out new jobs. That's, in a way, that's what you've suggested here.
When people put a new company in or something, there's all kinds of constraints put on by government. Tell them you have to contribute to a traffic impact fee. You've got to make sure that there's a park nearby. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that government extracts from businesses when they start, and at this point they haven't. But they haven't.
Okay, fine. Sort of like the university needs to has such an
same
impact.
thing. I mean, you can't put it.
Okay,
I mean, I don't
gotcha.
think you can tell a university you can't grow. You can't educate the kids of the state of California, but you can say you got to deal. The technical word is mitigate. You got to respond to the problems you're creating and do something about them, and you can make them do that. But again, local government can't do that to a university. That's a state issue. But the state of California should say, if you're going to have a UC campus or a CSU campus or something in a community, and all these communities that have UC campuses, Berkeley, Santa Barbara, I mean, they're all facing the same kind of problem.
Are you the first person who has suggested that that's what's needed at the state level?
I'm sure I'm not, though. I mean, I know I'm not the first, and I'm probably not the only by a long shot. Other people are thinking about it, but
so why is it?
Because I'll tell you what,
done?
you sit on a city council meeting, and these people show up, and they go at the same meeting, we need housing. We're dying without housing and stuff, and employers even show up and say we don't have any place to house our workers. And then at the same meeting, you got these neighbors showing up saying, like, don't build anything in our neighborhood or anywhere near it. And that's a real problem. And you sit there and you think, well, what could I do about this? And you say, well, even if I were to, like, start to build ugly, big things, with small little units like everybody wants and huge projects and stuff, and did it everywhere, made Santa Cruz ugly and disgusting, it wouldn't fix the problem. So what is this problem?
Okay,
you
now,
realize that's because the problem is the demand.
I think you quite possibly are right on that, but just for the sake of argument here, let me challenge you on that.
Please.
Why is it that you say, how do you know that if you were to build 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000, what would put a dent in it? How many would it have to be? And of course it would change the character of everything. Or is there, the answer is there's nothing you could do?
I think my view has been you have to build as much as you can. You can't say, I don't take this position that, the demand is coming from somewhere else and we can't meet it all, to say we shouldn't do anything. We should build as much housing as we can, because every house you build is a place for someone to live and contribute to the community. But you realize at some point that doing that is not going to really fix this problem. The cost of housing in Santa Cruz went over $900,000 at the last, for a new unit. That's the median price of a new home, $900,000. And of course, hardly anybody that lives here can afford to buy a house. But again, if you're in the Silicon Valley and you're pulling down some of the salaries they have over there, in stock options and stuff, you're in a position to buy a house like that. But people that live here can, their children can't buy a place here. So you start to, and you're sitting in the meetings, you start thinking, well, I guess I'll do what I can to build as much housing as I can, but I shouldn't fool myself that the rents or the cost of housing or the rents are going to go down because of this. They're not. The demand. So it's a simple economic formula that if the demand is that huge that you cannot provide a supply that will meet it. We're in coastal California. I mean, that's part of the problem as well. The city of Santa Cruz is 95% built out. So there are places in California and through the country where you could build a lot of housing, and that's not an issue. But if you think of Santa Cruz, you're not going to build a lot of new housing in the middle of residential neighborhoods. That will not go. I mean, it's not going to happen. They'd be recalled. No city council could do that and get away with it. You can't. So we're trying to do a lot of housing downtown. I think that makes a lot of sense. Build as much as you can, and you can go up there a little higher. It's not to the end of the world. And even
medium rise, right?
Even environmental groups like the Sierra Club take the position of you ought to build up in the cities and leave the wildlands wild, and that's sensible. But what's happening in Santa Cruz is, well, we don't want to build in the wildlands. We have a green belt around our city. We're not going to build anything out there. but we also don't want to build on any vacant lot in town. Leave it vacant. We don't want to build on the corridors. We don't want to build downtown. It's a self-defeating attitude at this point.
Exactly. It's incongruous. But I haven't seen people refused for an infill, for a permit for a vacant lot in any of the city council regimes.
If you have a single-family lot, it's a lot of record, and you have a right to build a house on it, and the city can't stop you. They have to approve. If they were not to approve some building on that house of some kind, you could take them to court and win it immediately, because there's state law that says if you have a lot of record, you have a right to build a house on it. What I'm talking about is more like there's a vacant lot, and somebody wants to build a larger house or something, and the neighbors start going crazy over what they're building, and at that point the city has some discretion over how big the house can be and those kinds of issues. And there's a lot of city council time is spent fighting over those things, like how big can a house be on a single family lot, that type thing. It shouldn't be. It should be automatic.
You're listening to the KSCO Saturday Special. MZ here with my guest Michael Rotkin. How many times were you mayor?
5 times.
Yeah, and city council person. That many elections.
6 elections. Well, our mayors get elected from the city council. So you get elected to the city council, and then the council chooses a mayor for a 1-year term. Council terms are 4 years. And so I was elected 6 different terms on the council. And I got some extra years because in the early years they moved the elections from the spring to the fall. I got 8 extra months. And then next year, 2 years later, they moved it from odd to even numbered Novembers. I got a 5-year term. But that's how I ended up with 26 years on the council, and I would have otherwise been 24. But
and wasn't there a time when you bowed out and figured, hey, you'd had enough, and then you got coaxed back in to run again?
Santa Cruz has a very sensible plan, I think, which is there's a 2-term consecutive limit. So if you serve 2 4-year terms, you have to get off the city council for at least 2 years. And that puts you back in the position of not being a lifetime council member in terms of never experiencing what it's like to be off of the council. Because you get shocked. When you get off the city council and you have 2 years off, you realize, as much as I know all the city staff people, I know how the agenda works, I know the players, and I still don't know what the heck is going on at City Hall. I have no idea during those 2 years. You're in the dark, and you're back in the problem of being a regular citizen, understanding how distant you are from the actual government experience. Right. But then you can run again after the 2 years. So I got after my first set of terms, and I was planning not to run again. 2 terms is a lot. I mean, it's like I spent a little over 8 years of my life on those 2 terms. And then we had an earthquake, and people talked me into running again because they thought somebody with experience might be helpful on the city council. So I was reelected after that earthquake, and that would have been in '92. And I had not been planning to run again. That was after I was off for 4 years, actually, and then ran again. And then I served 2 more terms, and I might have been done after that. I was sort of, and you run for... Because you only have 2-term limit, you're inclined to run for the second one. You've got a bunch of projects you're working on, things you didn't get done. So it's only 2 terms. So you stick for it, and then I'll get off after my 2 terms. I have to get off, and then I won't run again. That'll be it, after 2 years of being out of government. So the next time, and the tradition in Santa Cruz since 1948 has been that the top vote getter ends up being the mayor the next time there's an opening. And after my second set of terms, I'd been the top vote getter, and it was my turn to be mayor. And the city council, this time from the left. First time I was denied my mayorship from the right in Santa Cruz, and the next time was from the left.
Because you had become too right wing. For the leftists.
I think they felt I was too much pro-development. It wasn't really about left or right as much as back to this issue we were talking about. I voted for housing projects and things like that. Although I don't think I was. I mean, I think I am an environmentalist. I think I'm responsible about what you should and shouldn't build and so forth. I'm not about paving our town over. Nonetheless, people felt I was, too pro-development, not environmentally aware enough. And so they denied me the mayorship, even though I was the top vote getter. So that pissed me off so much that I waited 2 years and ran for city council and was mayor 2 more times. They should have let me be the mayor. They would have been done with me.
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, great. Yeah, Mike Rotkin was a major source of conversation here on KSCO the first decade or decade and a half. Okay, it kept so many people kept calling in and referring to this person that we have.
Well, I ran openly as a socialist feminist for office the first time, and that was a big cause of the KSCO response to me, I think.
Okay, but something about your dissertation, or for your
yeah, my doctoral dissertation is on the history of the progressive movement in Santa Cruz, and it was published. They published they didn't actually publish it, but they wrote about it in 3 front page stories in the Sentinel for 3 weeks in a row. I mean, once a week, a story on Sundays.
And that got people up in arms because you were like a mad scientist with his petri dish, presiding over a grand social experiment here.
And my idea was that the people that live here should control the town, and that was my radical idea that people were responding to. I mean, I think that the Sentinel story made it sound like I was conspiring to have some secret group run Santa Cruz, and if you read the dissertation, it's really clear that the goal was to try to empower neighbors and other people in the community and stuff to have more control over the community and have it less run by outside business interests.
But people would talk about on the radio station, again, this is decades ago. I haven't heard this in a long, long time, and maybe I shouldn't be dredging it up, but it's fascinating. It's a fascinating history of this station, actually, how they were talking about you as this ogre, who wanted to create a social experiment in real life, which you did by getting on the city council and bringing others with you, like-minded people, to create this socialized government experience in Santa Cruz.
Right, and we made some changes. When I first got elected, the city of Santa Cruz spent $80,000 a year on all of its social programs. All of them, 80,000 total. And in my first year in the majority on the council, I served 2 years in a minority with a conservative council.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And in 1981, John Laird, who's now, pretty well known in the local community, and Marty Wormhout, who's since passed away, got elected along with me and Bruce Van Allen. So we had 4 progressives on the council for the first time since 1948. And in fact, first time in the history of the city of Santa Cruz, back to like when we were founded in the 1800s. And
what did you say about 48 then? What is
48 was a new charter for the city that set up the current city council governance, the city manager system. So that's an important year to sort of think things happening from. And so since 48, there had been no progressive majorities. We had a majority. In our first budget, that would have been in June 82, we raised the social services from $80,000 a year to $522,000 a year. The next year, we raised $750,000 a year. The year after that, we raised it to $1 million a year in social programs. This is out of a $60 million budget or something like that. So,
so the budget wasn't growing, really, or at least by that.
They've been growing generally, as most local governments' budgets have been growing because people demand more and more stuff to get done, and things cost more and more to do. Anyway, so we did change things. We had social programs that had never been funded before. These are mostly nonprofit groups that provide services like senior meals and child care programs and that type thing. And so that was a dramatic kind of change. And some people liked that. Some people didn't like that at all. Some people thought that was socialism. I don't think that's socialism. I think that's responsible government to sort of provide services for your citizens, but your residents. But I think that's, but for sure, a lot of folks were unhappy about that. They thought, everybody should just carry their own weight, and cities shouldn't provide any kind of services. Should provide fire and police protection, but not social services, like an after-school program for kids or something.
Jeez, yeah. It's 10:45 here. We're going to have Mike on right up until the end of the program, which is an hour and 15 minutes from now. If you want to chime in and ask a question or make a comment, love to hear from you. 831-479-1080 is the phone number to call if you want to participate via telephone. If you want to send an email to mz@ksco.com, I will get it. And, feel free to do that. And so one of my favorite topics Well, my favorite. We've already covered some of that, and I'm in pretty much agreement with you, and you seem very, very reasonable when it comes to reasonable development. I don't think any of us want to see Santa Cruz become like San Jose. I mean, we have a little piece of it that does, the 41st Avenue corridor,
Right.
I guess. And that's enough, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's like...
But there are people who say, there are people who are angry. I'm not including you in this. I wish Gary Patton was here, because it'd be a wonderful show to have you and Gary Patton, because represent the city and the county of Santa Cruz. Because Gary was on the Board of Supervisors for 20 years, I believe.
That's correct.
And very, very influential. Whether you love him or hate him, everybody agrees that the growth status of the county of Santa Cruz credits Gary Patton.
Well, he's
the architect.
He's
right?
the main architect or supporter of Measure J, which was the growth limitation thing that was passed. We were growing at 4% a year in the county when he first got elected, and that might not seem like a big number, but it piles up, and pretty soon you're growing at a rate that just cannot sustain. And so Measure J put a limit around an urban growth line in the county that you could easily build inside of it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. That same year, 1978, that the county residents voted on Measure J, there was Measure O, an equivalent measure for the city. Am I right?
That was in '79, actually.
Oh, okay.
And but it's very similar.
Yeah.
And
so that was the people saying we want steps taken by our elected officials to limit growth to no more than what the state averages or something like that.
Right, and I worked hard on Measure O. That was on the same election I first got elected on, and I supported Measure O. There was also a rent control measure on that campaign that I supported, and that failed. But the Measure O passed by 81%, passed in every precinct in the city. That people wanted a green belt around the city, and they wanted to have limited growth in general in the city area. Very popular. Anyway, so Gary, his brilliance was getting that measure passed, because then there was a recall in '78, took away some of his progressive colleagues, and Gary Patton was the only progressive against four very, very conservative supervisors.
I don't remember that either.
Yeah,
wow.
no, there was Pat Liberty in the 5th District up in Scotts Valley, and Marilyn Liddicoat in the 2nd District.
I do remember that, yeah.
And I'm trying to remember people's names, but in South County,
Dan Forbes.
He was in the 1st District. He was in Live Oak, right here where the radio station is, and he'd already been served several terms already, many years on the supervisors, on the board of supervisors. Anyway, Gary by himself against 4 opponents tied them up for like 2 years using Measure J. The citizens had voted for it to limit because they were pro-growth. They wanted to build this county out like crazy, and Gary was able to stop him pretty much by himself. I mean, he had supporters in the community, but he was the architect of that measure, and then was able, as a member of the Board of Supervisors, in the meetings, to sort of force them to not do the kinds of things they were planning on, which were to like pave the place over. And it was pretty impressive by himself.
And but I remember a lot of people being upset, even people who supported him politically, over 2 issues. Number one, the turning away of money to widen Highway 17 and make it a much safer highway, and that money is long gone. I mean, that money was turned away because it would be growth inducing. That's one issue that people point to Gary and say, hey, he's the guy, he's the villain who
Right.
turned away all this money that we can never get back, and now we have to live with this horrible, dangerous highway. The other thing was having such an anti-growth and development attitude that when Capitola annexed some of the county, I don't understand how any of this works, but they had a much more pro-development attitude.
This is over 41st Avenue.
41st Avenue, and all the sales tax revenues went there.
Right.
Because Gary and his kind were the way they are, the way they were.
Actually, some of that stuff got done before Gary was in office. The city of Santa Cruz was planning to annex 41st Avenue and build and control that tax money, but
City of Santa Cruz?
initially.
Okay.
And then the LAFCO, this agency I mentioned before that determines the boundaries of cities, said, well, if you're going to take 41st Avenue, you're going to have to take all of the property between where you are now, which was 7th Avenue, which it still is today, and 41st. In fact, you have to go to 43rd or something. And you're going to have to take all of that property, and you're going to be responsible for police protection, sidewalks, storm drains, gutters, I mean, all this stuff. And that's what you're going to have to do if you want to take that. And the city balked at that, and that's when Capitola moved in. They only had to take, I think, 6 blocks from where they were to take it over.
I had no idea about this story.
And that's why Capitola controls 41st Avenue and all of
So
those
that's
tax
not
revenues.
fair. That's not fair that Gary is hung and with that.
What's fair about saying about Gary, and he would admit to this in a moment, or at least the first part of it, he won't agree with me about the second. When we didn't have growth, when we didn't have land use laws that limited growth in certain ways, or that stopped you from building stuff that really didn't make any sense, there's no way to stop it except limiting the infrastructure. Don't build the roads. Don't build the water systems. Don't build anything. Don't provide the infrastructure that's necessary for growth. That was his position, and that was the way he helped stop growth in the early years in the county. Once you've got those land use controls in place, where you have a general plan that says this is where we want to build, this is where we don't want to build, this is the density we're going to allow. To me, this is my view, it doesn't make any sense to continue to sort of hold back money for roads and water systems and the decent stuff that people need to live their lives. Because if the way we're going to limit growth is I can't have a garden in my backyard, I'm unhappy about that. You know what I mean? But the thing is, we now have land use stuff in place that would stop somebody from building a monstrosity next to your house in a
We did
residential
then.
neighborhood.
They're called zoning laws.
But we strengthened those zoning laws, and we had a bunch of controls we didn't have before. Once those things were in place, the idea of limiting the growth by stopping the infrastructure, I think, is not right. Gary still believes that if you really want to keep your county, your community small and not growing and not developing,
Okay, that's the part you would
I disagree with Gary
him.
about that.
He would disagree with you today if he was sitting next to you.
Absolutely. He'd make really clear that, even with all the zoning laws and everything else, if you provide the infrastructure, they're going to find a way around the zoning laws and build this stuff. That would be his position.
Right.
I don't think he's right.
I had coffee with Gary about a year ago, I talked to him. I offered him a venue for his land use commentaries, which were at that time off the air. They might still be, I don't know. And he said we consider it, except he was too busy at the time with a UCSC teachership or something.
Right,
I think
but
he was doing a course or two.
used to be on another radio station that's gone under, but
Right.
we had a program on it.
That's why I thought, why not KSCO?
Why not? Made sense.
One of the things I always respected about Gary, though I was pretty much in 180-degree, opposition to his politics and his views, and I share this with you too, is that both of you guys have always been sure enough about your position and confident enough to always accept an invitation to be on the conservative radio station.
Yeah, I've never understood that. I've never understood why progressive people, and in the other direction for conservatives to progressive areas, why a presidential candidate, for example, who's running for office will say, well, I won't go on somebody's television show or something. I won't go on the Bill Maher show, or I won't go to this or something because he's too conservative for me. Say, why wouldn't you go talk? I mean, that's the people you want to go talk to. You want to try and persuade people to change their mind about things.
Right. Okay, let's go to the phones. We have a couple of people on the line here. Let's go to Pat in Capitola, who wants a clarification. On what, Pat?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Back
Sure.
to you guys. Yeah, I was just in the Dave cave, so I went through some prostrate formula. I have to prostrate.
Oh, you came to help your prostrate to the Dave cave.
Yeah, I have to prostrate myself in front of my wife every time she's angry. So do I give it to her? Do I give it to her, or do I take it? So
Give it to her. See what happens.
Yeah, Mr. Rockin, earlier you were talking about, I think the biggest issue beyond housing is traffic. But you had made the comment, and once again, clarification, because you're just talking off the cuff. The Highway 1 commute is not Watsonville. Highway 1 commute begins at 4 in the morning from Gustine, Los Banos, Castroville, Salinas, King City. Highway 1 in Moss Landing is traffic jammed at 5 in the morning. These people aren't coming to Santa Cruz. They're using this as a transit point. And that was the one thing. And maybe you just said Watsonville, like I say, clarification, because you're just talking off the cuff at a radio station. But the thing goes far beyond Santa Cruz County or, Santa Cruz. It has to do with, multiple cities, multiple counties. And it's just become unbearable. Highway 1 is jammed from 7 in the morning all day, northbound and southbound from noon till 6. And we can't be myopic, and it's not just Santa Cruz problem. It's, I would not even say Central Coast, but Tri-County, Lee, San Benito, those types of counties. What's your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, you're absolutely correct. I serve on the Regional Transportation Commission now as a county citizen appointee. And we need to come up with a public transportation system that serves this community, because if the way we're going to fix this is simply trying to widen highways, we just have too much information. Not that we shouldn't occasionally widen highways at the appropriate places where they're bottlenecked, but in general, we need to have a public transportation system, whether it's rail or whether it's buses or whatever it is. Rail probably the most likely to be successful here, that addresses this whole regional area. We're in a mess. There's no question about it. And everything you've said is absolutely true. I mean, if you try to drive to Elkhorn Slough, which is way past Watsonville down, towards Salinas, you're bumper to bumper driving along, and you can't get down there. People come to work, people who work in Salinas and live in Santa Cruz, or vice versa. It's a serious crisis, and I'll take the entire area that you talked about. It's totally gridlocked during the commute hours, and sometimes on Sundays as well, when tourists come from other places to this area. And we need a decent public transportation system.
Right now.
No, and we need a decent transportation system that actually moves people in a reasonable way. And we've really underfunded that. I mean, we haven't raised the gas tax in the United States since 1994. And that's the major source of funding for highways. And so the ability to sort of make the highways meet the demand and provide alternatives to being in your car and actually be able to get somewhere. The places in the world, like in Europe, where people don't have this kind of congestion issues, they have decent public transportation systems, and we just don't. The United States is 30 or 40 years behind the times in terms of our transportation system.
Yeah, the people love their cars. Two other little points. One, talk about housing, but when they put in, like they widen, like you said, Moss Landing. We have a place in Moss Landing we sold because it's too dangerous to get across Highway 1. My wife's lived there 40-something years, and we live right in town. But with the introduction of computer programs like Waze,
right,
they have I'm on Bonita Drive, they Waze people through neighborhoods at 60 and 70 miles an hour. But when they widen, where they widen Highway 1 down by Moss Landing. Right. Why don't they close Jensen Road? Because people get off the highway, drive over the overpass on Salinas Road, go 70 miles an hour down Jensen Road, re-enter Highway 1, causing the traffic to, so their own widening is causing their own, because they don't look at this thing holistically. They look at, widen Highway 1. Well, what about the route next to it? And then when people same thing here. I live down in Aptos, but people get off before San Andreas or never get on the freeway. They drive down Little Bonita Avenue. It's jammed every morning for like 2 hours. Just so they can get around San Andreas or the Freedom Boulevard on-ramp, which, causes it to back up even further. And they don't look at, a total traffic system. I know JavaScript, I worked for FedEx for years, has tremendous, traffic route analysis patterns for their
Pat, you're a great call. I hate to do this, but we're coming up on the top of the hour. So I want to thank you for your call to 479-1080, and thanks for your listenership. Colonel Terry and Ken, we're going to hold you over until next hour. We'll put you on right at the beginning. Then, and anybody else who wants to call 479-1080, you are invited to do so. It's MZ. And
tomorrow and Monday are going to be in the mid to low 80s, and then we're going to drop back down into the high 70s for the rest of the week. It is now 11:06 and time to return to the Saturday special with Michael Zwerling.
Thank you, Griffin Queener. Okay, now we're going to do the Hour 2 intro for the Saturday special. 3, 2, 1.
Oh, hello, darling. I hate to hang up on you, but I'm sorry, baby, but I have to go. It's time for that wonderful record show. I'd love to visit, but you'll have to call.
have the inside track. Don't you wish you had the inside track like we do? Yeah.
I'm sorry, baby, but I really gotta go to KSCO Radio. Bye.
MZ, where do you get that retro music? That's impressive.
It came with the station. It was it was on a big reel. We've got some really good ones.
So these are ones that were actually done for the station back in the day,
Yeah.
when people were making music like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I was always curious about that.
There's a Latin jingle thing. Yeah, someday we should do a Saturday special just of nothing but KSCO jingles, because there's a whole slew of them. They're really a big old reel that came with the radio station.
Do you have a player you can even still play it on? That'd be the question.
But they've all been digitized. Yeah, so we have that. But anyhow, welcome back to excuse me. Here I scold the talk hosts when they say welcome back to hour number 2. Welcome to hour number 2. Welcome back to the Saturday special, but you don't welcome back to the hour number 2 unless it's, unless you've done a commercial or something, which we don't do. Commercials are not permitted on the Saturday special. Have you noticed we don't take a break? Griffin Queener, it's got to be the easiest job in the world and one of the more fun jobs, because you don't even have to worry about playing commercials.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I love the Saturday special. It's my favorite 2 hours of any week.
Okay. All righty. Now, Colonel Terry, spelled
Colonel.
C-U-R-N-E-L instead of the normal K-U-R-N-E-L.
Yes.
Mike finds that funny too. Is our next caller, and he has the best sense of humor of any of our callers, and by the end of the first sentence of his call, he has us all in stitches. Don't you, Colonel Terry?
Well, I'm not sure I can do that today on such brief notice, MZ, but I call in because I respect reality and the facts, things that our Santa Cruz County government fails to do frequently. Sadly. I lived in Marin for a number of weeks, and the Marin County citizens wouldn't tolerate for 2 days what Santa Cruz County citizens and taxpayers tolerate in poor performance and more than apparent corruption by our county commissioners, supervisors, and our city council. Now, with that said, UCS, and I don't offer things that I haven't got evidence for, but there's also evidence regarding UCSC. And is Mike Rotkin your guest today?
He sure is.
Here I am. I'm in the studio.
Well, I've seen your PhD thesis written decades ago. Do you still adhere to its components entirely?
I'm sure there's something I've changed my mind on, but generally, it's general argument I still support, yes.
All right. Anyway, regarding UCSC, in 1967, I was here coming back from college in the East, and I recall UCSC and the new chancellor promising that housing would be provided on campus that would be adequate for all of its future students. That's a fact and a piece of evidence. Second, the chancellors at UCSC and its management have been bad-behaving neighbors and were dishonest. As in 1967, they promised housing on campus for all its future students, and they have broken that promise and that pledge, and has also broken their common law obligations to the citizens and
Colonel
residents.
Terry, you obviously did not hear the program from the beginning, because you asked if Mike Rotkin is my guest, and he's been my guest for more than an hour.
Good.
And we also covered this topic already. They did everything they could, and I learned something new that I didn't know last hour, that the LAFCO quashed the building of 4,000 housing units on the campus that the university wanted.
But that doesn't mean your caller's not correct, that the university's been irresponsible about its growth in terms of the impact on the local community, particularly around housing students. I agree completely.
All right, Mike, we agree. And my third point is, why are our local politicians, the city council, the supervisors, and even our members to the state Senate and House, why are they so cowardly about standing up to Sacramento and saying Santa Cruz is being overburdened with this many students without housing, etc. It's not fair, it's not equitable, it's not honest to the citizens and residents of Santa Cruz County. Question mark, do you agree?
I think the problem is that it's not up to Sacramento. The issue really is in Oakland, where the regents meet, and the office of the president of the university resides. There's 10 campuses in the system, and that's the group you want to go. I agree with your conclusion about the irresponsibility, but it's like Sacramento would have a harder time dealing with it. Under the state constitution, Article 9, the University of California is exempt from control by the state. Their decisions about their growth, and it's often not even the local chancellors that control this, but the university system as a whole says, if you'd like any resources from the president's office, you will take X number of additional new students this year and every year. And so that's the place where the problem is. Now, the legislature only provides 17% of the campus's funding. So they used to have a lot more leverage. They used to have 100% of the funding came from the state, and they could tell the university what to do. Now the university, if they tell the university, we don't want you to grow, or we want you to do this, we want you to do that, they say, you're giving us 17%, take your 17% and we'll become completely autonomous and never listen to you again. So there's a little dance that goes on between Sacramento and Oakland over the question of the university growth impacts. And I agree with your conclusions about the problem, but who we have to go after is probably a little different than our state legislators.
We should have political leadership that also hauls the University of California regents to court, both federal and state, because anywhere English is spoken, the common law provides for equity. And the citizens and residents of Santa Cruz are being overburdened. It's also unfair to the students to bring them here and not provide affordable housing.
Right. Well, I was on the city council that has now sued the university 3 times over its growth issues, and I led that charge each of the times. It's sometime in the past, but they basically come up with these long-range development plans that are good for 10 years or 20 years, and they project a certain amount of growth, and the city has sued them over each one of those long-range development plans, including likely over the one that's being worked on right now if they don't change their course.
Did you know that, Colonel Terry?
Oh, but I'm appalled that your lawyers were so weak and ineffective as not to obtain federal injunctions. I can think about 7 legal arguments that could have prevailed, but I'm not surprised.
Colonel Terry is so intelligent, Mike Rotkin. He really is. I wish he would run for office, but I know that he would not get elected. Why? Because Terry, you're here, right? And I'm not saying this behind your back, right? I'm always ribbing him about developing or growing a sense of humor. I would buy fertilizer to fertilize him to grow a sense of humor, because if he were to he's so smart. If he were to run for office and get elected, it would be great. It would be good for the community. But there's no way in the world he'd get elected because he'd be painted as the angry, indignant candidate. If you listen to him talking, he's always angry and indignant.
It worked for our president. Why not him?
No, he says outrageous, funny things. And so do you.
Oh, no,
But Terry doesn't. Every time I put him on the spot and tell him to tell a joke, he says, I can't do it right now. Don't put me on the spot.
No, President Trump has never been accused of having a great sense of humor. He's been accused of many other things, but that's not high on the list, I don't think.
Well, okay, I guess it's my warped sense of humor. I find just every word that comes out of his mouth to be humorous and entertaining. But, okay, Colonel Terry, thank you for calling the Saturday special.
Welcome, gentlemen. Keep up the good work.
Have a good one. Ken and Aptos, it's your turn. You're on with Mike Rotkin.
Good morning.
And MZ. Yeah.
Hi, Ken.
Good morning. I wasn't sure which one of you guys was talking about this mass transit, the need for mass transit.
That was me, Mike Rotkin.
Okay, Mike, I don't even actually know who you are because I got it in the middle of the show. But
I'll just tell you quickly, I'm a former city council member for 6 terms and a mayor 5 times in Santa Cruz. But go on.
Okay, good. Well, here's the issue. If you drive over to San Jose, where hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on mass transit systems that are there and in place and working, go look at how many people are using it. I drive by the thing almost every day, and there's between 1 and I've never seen more than 3 people standing on the platform waiting for one of these trains. Normally, it's between 1 and 2 people standing waiting for a train. If that's success, you got your pages wrong, bud. Because there's no way you could tell me that this mass transit system that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to create becomes worth anything when one to two people are using it a day. It's a nightmare.
Well, honestly, I don't know that much about in the city of San Jose or in that their transportation system, but I had a job as a union rep for librarians at the Hastings College of the Law 2 years ago. And I went up there for bargaining a contract once a week, and I took public transit from Santa Cruz all the way up there. And I took the Caltrain and then the BART to get to the Hastings College of the Law. And there was standing room only in both of those modes of transportation. I had to get, in order to get a seat, I'd have to get there pretty early. And so some of the transportation systems are definitely, people are taking them and using them and stuff, but I'm not arguing with you. It may be that the light rail system or something's not working well and was badly planned, goes to the wrong place. I don't have any idea. You've seen it, so I assume it's true.
Yeah, I mean, I see it every day in South and Central San Jose. All right, well, that was my input. You guys have a great day.
Thank you.
I would highly recommend no spending on mass transit when it doesn't work. So
no, you shouldn't build it if you can't work out some studies that show you that it's going to be well used. I agree with that completely.
See?
right, have a good day.
Okay, thank you, Ken and Aptos, for calling 479-1080. Well, we might as well touch on it since that's why Rosie invited you. It's Labor Day tomorrow.
Day after tomorrow, actually.
It's yeah, you're right. Labor Day is always a Monday.
I made the same. It's funny. My wife. I said I was going on MZ's show on Labor Day. She goes, "It's on Monday." I thought it was on Saturday. Well, it's the Labor Day weekend. I was close enough,
Right. So Rosie called you and said, "Hey, it's Labor Day weekend, and you should come up and talk about the history of the labor movement on the Saturday special." So let's talk about that, but limit it to 30 seconds. No, I'm only kidding.
I wouldn't talk about the history so much as the state of
the current state. Okay, fine.
I will say about the history. Labor Day used to be on May Day, along with the rest of the world when when workers celebrate May 1st, when workers celebrate workers'
May 1st.
May
Right.
1st.
Right.
But
okay.
because in the United States we did not want to be part of what was pretty much a socialist movement in Europe. And other places around the world, we decided we'd have our Labor Day literally around the other side of the calendar in first Monday in September. So that's how we end up with it in September rather than in May when it used to be before. And but it's celebrated, and it's funny. I just saw there was a Roper poll done earlier this week that showed that now, interestingly, 64% of the respondents, the general population, believe that the labor movement's really important and plays a key role in our society and so forth. This is sort of like you don't miss your water till the well runs dry or something, because the labor movement is down to I think overall in the country 13% of workers belong to labor unions, and
is that okay?
It's even lower than that. I think if you go to the private sector, it's about 8%, and a little higher in the public sector where there's been some growth in labor work. I work for a union as partly part-time, and then currently as a volunteer for the UCAFT, the University Council of the American Federation of Teachers. We represent the lecturers who do about half the teaching in the UC system, and the librarians throughout the UC system. And I've been an officer and leader in that movement and so forth. And it's made a huge difference to us, to the people who work. And it's good for the students, and the fact that a lot of the issues we fight about are classroom size. They're not just about how much we get paid, but, so that the students have adequate resources for the things they need in the classroom. And I think it's the labor movement. We wouldn't have, I always think people forget this, but we literally would not have a weekend if it weren't for the labor movement. And people used to be working 6 or 7 hour days a week. And it's the labor movement that basically limited the number of hours typically to 8, and then overtime past that, or to working 5 days a week, and then you have weekends. So the labor movement's brought quite a bit of positive stuff that's the end of my history lesson on labor movement. Unfortunately, right now, our labor movement's in big trouble right now.
What happened? Here's what I think. I think the labor unions got too big for their britches decades ago, and this is the result.
I think there's a lot of different issues that were involved, but one of the problems at the end of World War II, about 35 or 36% of the workers in the country belonged to unions. It was never more than that, about a little over a third. And a lot of the stuff labor movements got involved in was trying to protect the jobs of people as automation came in a variety of ways. So the classic stories I heard about, I came from a labor family, but yet I'd still hear these stories. You know, that when they no longer had coal-driven trains, there were still people. The union still required the railroads to have people, coal shovelers on the train when there's no more coal to be shoveled. And a lot of that stuff sort of led people to this notion that labor movements were restricting the kind of natural growth of the economy and innovation and so forth, because they were sort of holding on to the old way things were happening. And some of that's still going on, I think, but I think that played a big role in people's sense of the labor unions being not appropriate for what was then 20th century, changes that were taking place after World War II. Also, I think a lot of this just has to do with the money of the people the employers, the people that basically have the control of not this media station, but in the mainstream media and stuff. A lot of that really is controlled by the people that send a message out there that, like, workers are lazy and they don't do their jobs, and unions are terrible and they protect that term for that. It was called feather bedding, this idea of having people doing jobs that were no longer necessary, but you still require them to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of built in the popular mind an idea that unions were kind of restricting the natural growth of the economy and the possibilities of the future or something. There's other causes for sure. But as I said, also just the negative messages sent out, whereas various states, there's now 22 states or something that are right-to-work states. The recent decision that we had, the Janus decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, that in California we used to have what's called fair share arrangements, where if you had a union, like at the university, we never had 50. We had 50% of the lecturers signed cards to make a union happen. But as far as who actually joined and started paying dues, we didn't have 50%. But the fair share arrangement that were passed by the state legislature allowed us to charge the non-members for the service of doing bargaining for them. Because when we bargain a new contract, they get the pay increase along with everybody else, even though they weren't paying dues. You couldn't charge them, you couldn't take money from them, their dues, and use it for political purposes, for example. That was limited, which makes sense. In other words, you don't want to take somebody's money and use it against their sense of whatever the heck they like. So if the, say, labor movement typically supports Democrats and you're a Republican, you don't want them taking your money and supporting Democrats. So we couldn't do that. But just pay for the costs of bargaining, to pay for the negotiators, to pay for the rooms and all the stuff you have to do, and the research, you could charge them for that kind of stuff. So it made a lot of sense. It was in place for about 40 years, and this Janus decision undid this. And all of a sudden, my union lost about half of its income. And we still, to this day, it's forced us to do more organizing, and we now represent a majority. We now have dues from a majority of our people.
I'm sorry if this got past me, and it did. How did Janus affect? What did Janus do?
It was a U.S. Supreme Court decision that unions could no longer take a fair share fee from non-members. So the state law in California that allowed us to do that was ruled unconstitutional.
Right. Okay.
Because it was taking away basically people's right of we were forcing them to associate with us in some level.
Right.
And as I say,
forced anything is wrong. Yeah.
But there had been this arrangement that we would use the money only for the purposes they benefited from directly, namely bargaining expenses.
They probably didn't believe it.
Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an issue because even Scalia, a very conservative justice, had said at some point, well, there's a problem of what he called the free rider, that these people are not paying dues, but they're getting bargaining that's been improving their salaries or their conditions of work or whatever else is going on.
Freeloaders, yeah.
But they ended up in the end, and Scalia voted for this to change this. This happened before he passed away. That they
obviously.
Yeah, thank you. You're right.
May I quote you on that?
Please, sorry for that. Well, point well taken there. Anyway, but so they had voted that that basically you could not take those fees from people if they didn't willingly decide to join your union. And that's been another sort of real serious hit to the labor movement. The positive impact of it was it forced us into doing more organizing and actually getting people to join and pay the dues themselves when they realized, oh, well, before other people were paying for me and they're taking the money and it's all working out, if I don't join this union, eventually I'm not going to have somebody representing me. I'm going to get screwed.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Great. Dan in Pacific Grove wants to talk about obstacles for mass transit. We'll take his call since he's called in.
Please.
Then we're going to move on to something else here that I think will be I will be fascinated about, and hope the listeners will be too. Dan in Pacific Grove, you are on with MZ and Mike Rotkin.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi, Dan.
I want to thank your guest for joining in the discussion today, and I really like hearing his insights. I have a question I'd like to state briefly, and then clear off the air unless you want that to happen differently. So this problem, the widely perceived problem, lack of mass transit, both the local and regional problem, what would you say are the obstacles, the fundamental obstacles, one or several obstacles, preventing any momentum from developing? There certainly seems to be a lack of intention and political will. So would you please share your insights on that?
I think that just at the sort of practical level, the problem is lack of funding. And the fact that the federal gas tax has been not raised since 1994 means that we just don't have the funding level that's necessary to build public transit projects. Why there's a lack of political will, I think that's a real issue, and that maybe has to do with the Americans' love of the automobile. Everybody would like to be somewhere else. You buy a car because you see a car ad that tells you, oh, you're going to be driving freely on a mountain road in the rain and going out in adventures and doing all this stuff. In fact, you're stuck in traffic somewhere. That's typically where I mean, the ad's a little misleading about what you're going to do with your car, but people have this idea that their car is sort of there. It's like I felt when I was 16. A car is freedom. A car is I get to go out on a date without having to borrow my parents' car, and I don't have to tell them exactly where I'm going and come back by 9 o'clock at night or whatever they had in mind for me. And I think people have that sense. The car is freedom. It's your ability to go where you want to go, when you want to go. Seniors, when they're told, you're losing your ability to actually drive safely, they don't want to give up their cars because it makes you feel like you're going to go back to being less than 16 and a kid again. And your whole idea of adulthood is that you have to have a car attached to you, to your hip in some way. So that's why maybe people are not willing to vote for transit taxes so much. Now, in this county, we just passed a measure on the ballot that is Measure D, providing us with significant amount of funding over the next 20 years. And the state, they passed SB 1, and the attempt to undo it with Proposition 6 following failed. So we now, for the first time in decades, have some money for public transit projects in California and here locally in Santa Cruz. And we're beginning to sort of work on how we could develop those projects. Right now, the transit district that runs the bus system is in consultation with the Regional Transportation Commission to come up with a plan for how we're going to take advantage of the old railroad corridor that runs all the way through Santa Cruz County, and to ask what kind of public transit would make sense on that corridor, because we could carry thousands of people and take some of the pressure off of Highway 1 if we develop that. We have to pick the right kind of public transit, because people are not going to just take anything you provide to them. You have to do some serious research and polling and talk to people about issues and bring some planners in here and think about how the stations are going to be and how you're going to get to your final destination. Those are, because a train, for example, doesn't take you to the door of your business or your house. It takes you nearby. What kind of local transit is there going to be to move you from the train to your house? And not everybody's going to ride a little red jump bicycle. Some people are going to want to ride in a vehicle of some kind. Maybe it's too far to walk for some folks. So those things need to be worked out, and we're going to spend the next 18 months trying to resolve that question and then develop a public transit system right through the heart of Santa Cruz County, from Davenport all the way to Watsonville, and actually to the Pajaro Station, which will connect us with the rail system that runs through the rest of California.
Well, the interest seems to be growing because the phone board is loading up now. So maybe we shouldn't.
Maybe I picked up a wrong issue to open up. That's a big controversial issue in the county.
It's fine. I mean, we can sort of roll with the punches. Anyhow, Dan in Pacific Grove, thanks for calling 479-1080. Scott in Live Oak, you're on the air. Real quick.
Thank you. Well, I started commuting back when there was no divider in 17.
Right.
And as far as I'm concerned, the people that have been running Santa Cruz County and the cities around here for the last 40 years have never had the people's interest at heart who had to commute. And I'm telling you, nobody can live on this side of the hill and not commute. And we're not Europe. You're not going to shove any kind of mass public transit down anybody's throat. As a taxpayer, I'm on a fixed income. I can't afford the amount of help that you guys are giving me now. It's terrible.
Well, about 25% of this county commutes over the hill to work. It's not everybody, but it's a significant number of people, about a quarter of us. And if you were to ask somebody, and more and more, and we filled up the Highway 17 buses. Those things are like a capacity. Those are not like unused and stuff. But there's a limit to how many of those we can put on the road. And we have demands for, I'm on the transit board, we have demands for more and more service all the time, and we can't meet it because we simply don't have the money to provide enough buses to make it all happen. So I think, whereas some people, of course, I agree, you can't make anybody I don't think you should or could make anybody get out of their car. If you provided people with a public transit system where you could sit in the seat and not have to stand, and you'd be guaranteed the thing's going to be on time and would take you where you need to go, thousands of people from this county would get on that public transit system rather than fight Highway 17 traffic. I think there's no question about it. And I did that. This is not just talking the talk. I did this for a year when I was commuting to San Francisco once a week. I took the Highway 17, took my bike. I don't have a car. I took my bicycle to the Metro station, took the Highway 17 bus over the hill, took Caltrain up to the BART, and then walked the last 2 blocks to Hastings College. And there was I could read. There's Wi-Fi on all those systems, so I could do work while I'm traveling instead of driving and going nuts doing that commute. And it didn't take me that much longer. I could do that in 2 hours, and I defy anybody to leave Santa Cruz, go to San Francisco, and find a parking space in the Tenderloin in 2 hours. It can't be done. So it was just as quick as taking the public transit that I did.
The problem I'm having as a citizen and a homeowner in this county is that any kind of need for anybody that needs need, the only place you people come to get money is from parcel tax. Now, if you guys are really serious about changing stuff, make Santa Cruz County another penny sales tax on it. I mean, for crying out loud, let everybody have skin in the game.
Right, and the Measure D that we passed actually is a half-cent sales tax, and I couldn't agree with you more. At some point, you're piling too much stuff on the parcel taxes and property taxes, and it's not necessarily, and most of it doesn't come to the local government. Most of that stuff goes to the state, and so we really need to come up with other ways of funding this public funding, and parcel taxes are not the answer to every question, although there are some people that believe that. They're the easiest ones to get passed, apparently, and that's why they keep choosing them over and over and over again.
Yeah. There's more people who don't own land in this county that override the people that do own land in this county. That's a real simple one.
That's probably a good reason. I agree.
Yeah. All righty. Hey, thank you, Scott and Live Oak for calling 479-1080. Here's Pure Heart about transportation. Hey, Pure Heart, you're on. Hello? Pure Heart. 3, 2, 1. Pete in Santa Cruz, you're on.
Hey, good afternoon, gentlemen. I was just wanted to ask your guest today. I know he's on the board of the Regional Transit Committee. Is that the correct name?
Regional Transportation Commission, correct.
Yeah. So do you guys have do you ever have meetings where there's public input to that?
Yes, we have. All of our meetings generally are in public. I mean, except for if we go to closed session for a labor negotiation or something. But they're all in public. We meet. We have a general meeting once a month, and there's a follow-up, a second meeting most months, but not every month. And they're all done in public. They're all advertised and announced, and they're all televised.
Yeah. Okay, because I saw on the community TV. Is that where you would watch it, or?
Right. The community television records it. I mean, actually. Covers it, and it's played on those channels. They're 26 or 71, depending where you live in the county.
The reason I asked is because I was just listening to one of your previous callers, and he was talking about the commuting over the hill, and you're talking a lot about getting to San Francisco and commuting to different areas. But for me, for the rail trail corridor, as a property owner and somebody that works in the city, being able to get from Mission Street to 41st at any time of the day or the afternoon is almost impossible now. So the quality of life here has gotten really so horrible. I would like to see that trail. If a senior citizen or a student or anybody wanted to get on a bike or walk or any type of transportation could get from one side of our town to the other. We can't do that now. So
Right.
I get the helping the commute part, like the mass transit. I get that too, but is there some way we can combine those? I mean, is that
you're right on the target, because our plan is to build, and we already started on the pedestrian and bike part of this, to have a bike pedestrian path the entire length of that from Davenport all the way to Watsonville, and next to it a form of public transit. Some people are concerned because they're imagining a huge diesel train running by their homes, 15 times a day or 20 times a day, and that's not the plan. We're talking about some kind of a tram or some relatively light system that would run next to the bicycle and pedestrian path. And our plan is to build both of those, and those are both underway. We've got funding for it. We've done a lot of the planning. The planning we're doing right now is what kind of public transit would be appropriate, what kind of tram, or where would the stations go, and how would you connect from the stations to the places you finally need to get.
Yeah, how would you?
But the first thing will be built will be the bicycle and pedestrian trail, and that's under construction right now in the city of Santa Cruz. They've already built a bike path over the trestle over the San Lorenzo River, which is great.
I used it yesterday.
It's a beautiful little thing. It used to be a nightmare. You have to get off your bike. You couldn't get across there. And as someone who doesn't own a car, I mean, I do get around on a bicycle a lot, and it's I have to say it was a fantastic thing. But that's the beginning. It's going to take time and money, but it's in the works, and we're definitely planning to build both the trail and the rail.
Great.
Can I ask you one last question? And it was very helpful to me. And I've lost kind of track of time. But in the last year or two, I was up on either Swift or on Delaware, right where the railroad tracks cross. But there was a telescope that you look through, like at the end of the wharf, and you actually looked at it, and it would visualize. It showed you how the train was coming through and how it would interact with the housing. It was something set up by the city.
Oh, that's
and I
interesting.
brought my wife, and I took my wife. I said, "Hey, you got to see what this plan is." And we rode our bikes up there, and it was gone like the week later. But it was like a survey type thing. You'd look at it, and they'd ask you questions. Was that anything to do with your guys, your committee?
That was partly funded by the Regional Transportation Commission, but mainly by the city of Santa Cruz. But if you'd like to know more about this plan, any of your listeners, Michael, want to know more about this plan, they can just go to. It stands for Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Commission. So the letters are SCC or RTC.com. And go to that website, and on that, right on the front page, you can click on the rail trail proposal, and you can see the plans and then some drawings and a whole bunch of information, bring people up to speed on where we are in that process. It's going to take a while. I mean, people want stuff tomorrow, and we don't have the money. That's the money issue. If we had all the money, we'd build it in the next 2 weeks. But it's like it wouldn't be 2 weeks; it'd be a year. But we're working on it. It's under construction. We have plans for the whole thing, and we own the right of way. That's the main thing. The county bought that right of way, and we own it. We don't have to pay for
Southern Pacific.
It was actually eventually bought from. I guess it was still Southern Pacific when we finally purchased the thing in the late. It was 2005 or so. We actually bought it.
I want to get into a discussion of sanctuary cities before too much time goes by. But Gerald, thank you, Pete.
Oh, thanks,
Thanks for calling, Pete.
Yeah, and here's Dan who wants to talk. Dan, Gerald, and Pure Heart, I think want to talk. Then we're going to finish up transportation. So, and we're going to keep this real quick. Go ahead, Dan. You're on.
Okay, the bus service in Santa Cruz and Altos is pretty good, but the bus service here in Watsonville is terrible, really bad. I have a hell of a time catching a bus.
Right. I mean, we had to make major cuts in our system. It's now 2 years ago because, again, lack of funding issue and stuff. And so we're hopeful that we'll begin to re-expand that system again as we get more funding. I've spent several times going to Washington, D.C., lobbying for funding because the federal government has really stepped out. The federal government used to mainly fund public transit, and now they're like a junior partner, and we've got to get them to recommit.
Does
to
that
public
have
transit.
anything to do with the Trump administration? Or not?
Trump administration's not been helpful, but I can't blame it on them. I say Democrats and Republicans alike have been lax in their support in Washington, D.C. for public transit. And what's happening more and more around the country is Republican areas that used to not care so much about public transit because they're not particularly focused on low-income people as much as, people a little more money, not necessarily wealthy, but people a little more money.
Yeah.
They are now discovering that they have commuters that are fed up with sitting in traffic, and they're interested in public transit. So we've been out lobbying people, both Democrats and Republicans, who are beginning to think we should do something. But then now with the latest word I got, just to show you how dysfunctional Washington is, both sides are saying, well, if the Trump administration brought a proposal for funding public transit, which they're not going to do, but if they brought one in an election year, we wouldn't support that. They would make them look good, and the Trump administration's going like, well, no, we're not going to support this stuff. We think in fact, the Trump administration's position was, this is Donald Trump's actual words, this federal government ought to be out of the transportation business. It's a local concern. And I'm sorry, we pay a lot of taxes to Washington, and I think transportation's high on the list of people of what people would like Washington to support.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Dan in Watsonville. Here's Pure Heart calling back. Pure Heart. Pure Heart.
Are you awake?
Okay.
He
I don't know what the deal
He calls in and gets busy. Okay.
Anyhow, Gerald in Santa Cruz.
Hi.
Keep it brief because I really want to hear what Mike has to say about sanctuary cities.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll keep it real brief. I'm Gerald. I live in Santa Cruz. Good to talk with you, Mike.
Sure.
So I'm part of the Rails and Trails group with Rick, and the Japanese have a what they call a dual-purpose vehicle. It's like a school bus. It carries 30 or 40 people. Goes on surface streets and then converts instantly to tracks and goes along track right-of-ways.
Uh-huh.
It's electric. It'd be perfect for our community when we finally develop the rail system and pedestrian bike route. Imagine that you can get off at any intersection that the rail passes and get directly to Dominican or Cabrillo or any of the main stops along the way without needing a station.
Yes, I've been studying a number of those systems, and they have those systems in Europe as well, in a couple different countries.
In Europe too.
Yeah,
right. It's a terrific idea.
So right now, the Regional Transportation Commission and the Transit District are in a joint project to study what's the best actual form of public transit, and that's an example of the kind of thing that they need to look at. You're looking at that.
Right.
They'd be looking at whether maybe it all should be buses and not have it be rail, but we really need to study those issues. We have to figure out what costs the most to put in, what will attract the most riders, what costs the most to operate and maintain. And so those are the kinds of issues that need to be addressed. And I think that's a really good example of the kind of thing that should be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Thank you,
and
Gerald.
one other quick thing.
No, we're done. We're done. I appreciate your call here, but I got to step in or it would never end, and we wouldn't get to what I want to talk about.
And he's the boss.
And that's the sanctuary cities. Okay, we are a sanctuary city in Santa Cruz.
Correct.
San Francisco is a sanctuary city.
Correct.
Okay, what do you think about sanctuary cities?
This is what I think. I think, like anything else, things can be abused and done badly. But I support the general concept of sanctuary cities. Obviously, if you have somebody who's a criminal and who's been involved in violence or, the long list of the things we would agree on are not antisocial and criminal and shouldn't be done, then you're not trying to protect those people or say, well, they're an immigrant from somewhere else and therefore, we're going to provide them sanctuary and they shouldn't be like, the law enforcement can't touch them, or if they got this record and stuff that's going on. It's crazy to think that you would say to those people, they have some rights.
Is anybody saying that?
Well, there's a bunch of what people are saying. Sanctuary cities are bad because there's an example on the news today.
Yeah.
Some guy in San Francisco who was arrested 5 times or so. I just heard this morning. 5 times or so in San Francisco, was let out again and then involved in another crime, maybe killed somebody or did something horrible. And so that's why sanctuary cities are bad. The reason sanctuary cities make sense, and you talk to law enforcement people about this, like our local police, you need to have a population in the community that feels that they can trust the local police, that if they call the police because of a problem, because somebody's robbed them or there's been violence or shot off a gun or something, that if they call the police, they're not going to be met by the immigration service that's going to deport them because they've called with a complaint. And the main impact of Sanctuary City is there's not a whole lot of other stuff that it does. The main thing it says is we're not really going to cooperate with the immigration service, whether it's called ICE, which is the current term for it, or back when it was I forget now. Anyway, INS. That our police are going to deal with. Do their work as police officers. And if you call us with a complaint, we'll come and talk to you, we'll interview you. You can tell us who did it, and we're not going to turn your name over to the federal government so that you're going to be on a list somewhere that's going to get deported. That, for me, is the major reason behind sanctuary cities, because when a police officer, there's a shooting in the Beach Flats, for example, in Santa Cruz, it happens. Police officers show up and they go like, what happened? And everybody's running into their doors, closing them, looking the other way. I'm not going to talk to anybody from the government, from the police, because the next thing you know, because I'm a legal citizen, but I have got a cousin that's living in the house or whatever who's not. And I don't want anybody coming and taking that person and shipping them back to Mexico or back to Costa Rica or wherever they would come from, Guatemala or wherever they've come from. I don't want that to happen. So the police really want the citizens to know. So our police department has set up, for example, a police academy where they invite regular citizens to come and learn more about police work, and they get to go see the shooting range and talk to police, go on a ride along with the police, and they learn more about how the police do their work and what their issues are. And we have special ones of those done in Spanish and invite people from the Latino community in Santa Cruz to come and learn more about our police and try and create a real positive relationship between the police department and immigrant communities. And that's the rationale behind sanctuary cities. Now, some people take this to crazy limits. They're thinking again, well, we're a sanctuary city, so that means people get to vote or something. No, citizens should be voting, not people who aren't citizens. I mean, I think I feel pretty strongly about that. But people should feel safe in their neighborhoods. They should feel fine about calling the police and know that the city of Santa Cruz, for example, we had raids in Santa Cruz back in the day where the police came in with 6 or 7 Ford Broncos or something, into the Beach Flats neighborhood, rounded up people and stuff. They had to let some of them go because they were citizens and whatever, but anybody with brown skin was getting wrapped up in this stuff. Kids at school, parents didn't come to pick them up because their parents had got picked up by the immigration service. And the immigration service used to depend upon local police departments when they came into the community to help back them up. Because even though there's 6 cars full of them, it's not enough to really deal with if the residents go crazy on them and stuff, they need backup. Right. And what the sanctuary city says is, we're not backing up immigration raids. If you're going to go find somebody who's broken the law, we'll help you because they've broken the law. We arrest people that break the law. But we're not doing general roundups of people without documents, undocumented folks or illegal aliens, whatever you want to call them. But let's say undocumented people in the community. We're not going to do that anymore. And we're going to make people feel that if they call the Santa Cruz Police Department or the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office, because they're also a sanctuary county, they will not cooperate with the INS on this stuff. And again, they should, of course, give up criminals to the INS who, and they shouldn't, if somebody's in jail and not on a speeding ticket, but they're in jail because of some serious crime that they've committed, then of course they should be turned over to the authorities and not released to get back in the community or allowed to run back to Mexico or whatever else they're doing. And there are places where sanctuary city stuff is being abused and where people are using the sanctuary city status to say, oh, we can't do anything to that person because they're in.
Is Santa Cruz one of those places where it's being abused?
I don't think so.
How about San Francisco?
I don't know that much about San Francisco, but apparently this story made it that I heard, if it's true, and I don't know all the details, it sounds like somebody had told them, well, this person who's committed this crime cannot be, released into police custody or something because we're a sanctuary city, and that's nuts.
The biggest argument against sanctuary cities, in my mind, is a 2-word argument. Kate Steinle.
Okay, tell me the story.
Oh, Kate Steinle is...
I want your listeners to know. I know what it is. I know that.
Okay. Yeah, how can you not know what Kate Steinle is? Pier 14 in San Francisco in 2013 or 2014?
14, I think. I'm not sure.
Okay. Kate Steinle was a beautiful young woman in her early 20s, I believe. early mid-20s, and she and her father were walking on Pier 14 that I've walked on many times. It's a very nice place. And she ended up dead because some multiple deported and come back and multiple deported and come back person killed her, shot her dead.
So,
okay, now a lot of people feel that if it wasn't for the sanctuary city status of San Francisco, that Kate Steinle wouldn't be dead. How do you feel about that?
What I think is that might be the case in that particular anecdote, that story you've just told. We have a lot of statistical evidence at this point that undocumented people commit fewer crimes because they're more nervous about getting caught and what the consequences are than regular U.S. citizens. Also, people are concerned that these people are taking money from us and stuff because they're like taking our services and things. Every study that's ever been done in California shows that the immigrants end up paying more money because they get taxed on stuff like everybody else, but they don't get the services that everybody else gets because they're undocumented. So once in a while, somebody sneaks through and gets a hold of it. If you look at the actual statistical evidence on these issues, rather than the stories, which are quite lurid at times, you realize that the undocumented community does not create a safety issue any more than the people in general in our society. We have a safety issue in our society. There's no question. The schools are failing us. There's a long list we don't have time in your show to get into. But the reality is that the undocumented people that are in our communities are not creating a higher level of crime than the people that live here regularly. It's a lower level. It's documented that it's a lower level of crime that's going on. And yes, there will be stories of some undocumented person. If they weren't here, that person wouldn't have been hurt or killed or whatever happened. But are they doing it more than other people? That would be the argument, that somehow that these people are doing more crime than everybody else, and they're not. They tend to get jobs. I mean, that's the other thing that's going on. Undocumented people have to work their butts off and stuff to get along. They don't have easy access into the job market or something, so they're doing the jobs nobody else wants to do. And so the idea of having a sanctuary city, the city of Santa Cruz, which is a tourist town, could not run without undocumented people providing our food and the county, the strawberry work that's done, everything else. A lot of those people are undocumented, and the growers certainly look the other way when they hire them, and they're very unhappy. There's a weird alliance that goes on between the growers and who are generally very conservative people, but when it comes to this question, they do not want to see stricter immigration rules because it would mean they wouldn't have workers to
That's
pick their
very
crops.
interesting. That gives me a wonderful idea for a future Saturday special. Having a grower on and having this discussion about sanctuary cities. I wonder if they'll be truthful.
What's really funny is our Democratic representatives in Congress, all of them going back to, Leon Panetta, Sam Farr, and now Jimmy Panetta, they're liberal Democrats generally in their view about stuff, and they would tend to support sort of immigrant issues. But they are huge advocates for this stuff because not only do they sort of have their democratic leanings towards the immigrants, but the growers in the Monterey County in this region
that contribute majorly to
their campaigns. They also have the same view about this question, so it frees them to be quite outspoken on this issue in a way that other people are not in Congress. If it were up to them, we would have had an immigration solution, and we need to do something about having our border and having how stuff is dealt with and so forth. But it needs to be rational, and that's the thing that drives me nuts.
So Trump's is not rational. Close the border. Yeah,
a physical wall. Right now, people go. I asked I was at a friend's house. He had hired someone to work in his yard, and I say, well, I speak Spanish. I asked him, how did you get here and stuff? I thought did you have to crawl through the desert on your hands and knees or whatever? He says, no, I drove in a car through a tunnel across the border. I mean, it's like, I said, how long was the tunnel? He says, I don't know, about a half mile or something. It's like, and I mean, the border is peppered with these tunnels and alternative stuff, and you're going to build a wall and you think that's going to keep people out. That is frankly stupid. That's the word I don't typically use the word stupid about other people, but that is the idea, maybe not the people. The idea that a wall is going to stop people from coming here, and it'd be a physical wall. I mean, if you're going to build a wall, make an electronic wall that allows you to see when people are, that wakes you up when people are crossing where they shouldn't be or something. But the idea of building a wall, it's just stupid. It costs lots of money. And now our president has decided, this is my favorite thing about, I'll end with this one notion on Trump. and not get into the rest of it. He's now said, "Oh, well, I'm going to just take the money. It's not appropriated, but I'm going to build the wall, and I'm the president and stuff." I'm going to be blunt. I mean, that's the way Adolf Hitler got started. The guy gets, he's elected to office, Hitler, and he only had the power of the chancellor of Germany, started taking powers, and people did not stop him. And the idea that Trump is going to take the money and spend it the way he wants. And then he said, and if you help in this process and you get arrested because it's illegal what we're doing, he said, I'll pardon you. I mean, that is fascism that is fascism. And I don't use that word loosely ever. And I hadn't argued with people against using it against Trump earlier on. This is now crossing that line where the president decides, I'll decide what I want to do and nobody can stop me. That's crazy.
All right, Pat in Santa Cruz and Rich in Salinas. Griffin, I don't know. He's screening a call, I guess. I don't know. All right, we'll just put them on and see if they're sticking to this topic. Pat in Santa Cruz, you're on. What do you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to discuss what Mike has been saying for the last 15 minutes, which is basically the same old boilerplate that we always hear about open borders. I could refute each thing he said point by point, but obviously we're out of time almost, so I can't. I would love to go on your show and discuss this with Mike.
Okay, well, maybe we'll schedule it, okay? But yeah, you're right. It's terrible. I wish I would have, started this topic.
Let me just say, I'm not, just for the record, I'm not in favor of open borders, and I think we should have a secure border. And on the other hand, I don't think we can send 11 million or 12 million people back to Mexico. I don't think that's.
I would love to discuss this with you, Michael. I would love to discuss it with you, but
Pat, please send me an email, mz@ksco.com. I see I don't have anything to write with now, so I can't take. Your call.
Pat,
I know. But send me mz@ksco.com, and we'll see if we can set something like this up. Okay. Appreciate the call, Rich and Selena. So, what's your topic?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. This is about that Kate Steinle situation. You said originally you heard something on the news about it, but that's the one that Mike was telling you about.
Right.
The guy was released. This is the 5th time he's been into the country and released from the San Francisco Police Department. He was on the wharf, said he found a gun, and just happened to fire it, and that's how she got killed. He was been here 5 times, been sent back, yet he's back again. 5 times and still released, and ICE couldn't pick him up. That's how she got killed. And that's anybody that comes here illegally and causes a rape, a robbery, or DUI accident. Wouldn't have ever happened if they hadn't come here illegally. They come in legally, fine. But if you're coming in illegally and you cause a crime, and there was some thing I heard on the radio the other day, 180,000 in the last 10 years, 180,000 people, illegals, that the government has dealt with all over the United States in the last 10 years, from 2000, up till 2018, I believe, 2008 to 2018. And also, 60 to 65% of the people now the government has arrested goes to prison are illegals. They're illegal immigrants. I mean, I don't know what numbers you're looking at, but...
Okay, hey, we are at the end of the program. Rich, thanks for calling. Apologies to Larry in La Selva Beach. I guess he didn't realize that we had moved on from the transportation issue. Obviously a hot issue that we'd like to. We hit on a couple of really good issues today. Plus, we did cover the history of the labor movement somewhat.
Yep.
Right. So that was great, Mike Rotkin. Thanks for coming on. Don't be a stranger. Got to have you on a lot more often if you're willing to, and you're not too busy in semi-retirement.
It's always a pleasure, and all you have to do is invite me. I don't force myself on people.
Hey, listen, we would all like you to do a regular thing here, and in the past that hasn't been in the cards, but maybe it can be in the future. Seriously, I mean, like I'd love Gary Patton to do a regular thing. It doesn't even need to be two-way. It would be helpful if it was anyhow. 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 Helpful if it was anyhow.